Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled in the hills, there lived a shepherd boy named Arlo. Every day he led his flock of sheep to graze in the lush green meadows nearby. Arlo loved the tranquility of the hills, but he was also a playful boy who often found his days dull and uneventful. One sunny afternoon, as he sat on a rock watching the sheep graze, Arlo noticed a sly fox lurking near the edge of the meadow. The fox's sharp eyes glinted as it observed the flock. Arlo instantly understood that the fox was planning to steal one of his sheep. At first, Arlo thought of scaring the fox away, but then he had an idea. If I let the fox take a sheep, it might return every day, he thought. I could trap it and make it my pet. That would certainly make my days more exciting. The next day, Arlo deliberately let one of his sheep wander closer to the forest. Sure enough, the fox appeared, snatched the sheep, and disappeared into the woods. Arlo watched it go, already planning how he would capture it the next time. However, the fox was clever. Each day it returned and took another sheep, but it never fell for Arlo's traps. The shepherd boy grew frustrated and impatient. He decided to lie in wait one evening, determined to catch the fox once and for all. As the sun set, the fox appeared. It moved silently and swiftly, heading straight for the flock. But Arlo had underestimated the fox's cunning. While Arlo waited in one spot, the fox approached from another, snatching yet another sheep without being seen. By the time Arlo realized what had happened, the fox was gone, and so was his favorite lamb. Arlo returned to the village with fewer sheep than he had started with. When the villagers noticed, they scolded him for his carelessness. "Arlo," one elder said, "a clever boy like you should know that outsmarting a fox is no easy task. You should have protected your flock instead of playing games. Now you've lost more than you bargained for." From that day on, Arlo watched over his sheep with greater care. Though he still longed for excitement, he understood the value of responsibility and the importance of protecting what was his. After Arlo learned his lesson, he grew more diligent in watching over his flock. Days passed peacefully, and the fox didn't return. The sheep seemed happier, grazing without fear under Arlo's careful watch. However, the story didn't end there. One moonlit night, as Arlo lay under the stars near his flock, he heard a rustling sound from the bushes. His heart raced. Was it the fox again? Gripping his staff tightly, he crept toward the sound. To his surprise, it wasn't just the fox, it was the fox with her cubs. Arlo froze, realizing that the fox wasn't stealing out of malice or greed, but to feed her young. For a moment, his anger melted into curiosity. The cubs looked weak and hungry, their tiny forms barely visible in the moonlight. The shepherd boy's heart softened. The next morning, Arlo came up with a plan. Instead of setting traps, he placed scraps of food near the edge of the meadow. The fox returned cautiously that night, taking the offering and disappearing back into the forest. Arlo repeated this for several days. Eventually, the fox seemed to understand that Arlo meant no harm. She stopped hunting the sheep and instead relied on the food he provided. The villagers noticed that Arlo had stopped losing sheep and praised his cleverness. Over time, the fox and her cubs grew strong. One day, as Arlo was tending to his flock, he saw the fox sitting at a distance, watching him with calm, golden eyes. It was as if she was silently thanking him. Then she disappeared into the woods, this time for good. As the seasons changed, Arlo continued tending his flock with renewed wisdom and care. Life in the village remained peaceful, but Arlo often found himself thinking about the fox and her cubs. Had they survived the harsh winter? Did they find a new home? One day, during a particularly cold winter morning, Arlo noticed something unusual. Near the edge of the meadow, fresh paw prints dotted the snow. Intrigued, he followed the trail into the forest. To his astonishment, the paw prints led to a small clearing where the fox stood, her cubs now grown and strong. But this time, the fox wasn't alone. A pack of wolves loomed nearby, circling her and her cubs menacingly. Arlo knew he had to act quickly. Though he was frightened, he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Gripping his staff tightly, Arlo shouted and waved his arms to make himself appear larger. The wolves hesitated, their golden eyes flickering between the boy and the fox. Summoning his courage, Arlo hurled a stone at the pack leader. With a low growl, the wolves retreated, disappearing into the forest. The fox and her cubs stood still watching Arlo. For a brief moment, there was an understanding between them, a bond forged not just by kindness, but by courage and trust. Then, as silently as they had appeared, the fox and her family slipped back into the shadows of the woods. From that day forward, Arlo felt a deeper connection to the wild creatures of the forest. He realized that bravery wasn't just about protecting what was his, but also about standing up for what was right. The villagers noticed a change in Arlo. He was no longer just a playful shepherd boy. He had grown into a wise and brave young man. Though the fox and her family were never seen again, their story lived on in Arlo's heart, teaching him, and eventually the villagers,